So we're going to talk a little bit about the vision and the structure for the Portlands. To start, we're going to share some of the kind of big ideas, the approaches to the place that have been informing and driving the vision. And then we're going to talk about how we've started to ground some of those moves of the vision in more concrete structures that layer together to create a framework plan. So the starting point is the recognition that this site is enormous. The Portlands is huge. It's basically the scale of the city itself. So what does that mean? Well, if you actually take a circle that's comparable in size to the Portlands and you overlay it on the neighborhood plan, it's kind of remarkable to see that the same scale of the Portlands actually fits over 21 neighborhoods in the city. These are diverse neighborhoods that have different histories, different characters, that accommodate different uses and different populations, all within this area. The same area of the Portlands, which on the one hand, we think of singularly as the Portlands, but it makes us wonder, is it just the Portlands? And could the idea of diversity actually become something that's central to the vision? So the vision for the Portlands, we believe, can be as layered and diverse as the place itself and the people who inhabit it. So just like the city of Toronto, that can be its strength. And the vision for the Portlands, we really think, in order to be diverse, has to be a collective one. It has to be ours. Is actually big enough to accommodate multiple visions. So visions that are already underway, visions that we're talking about now, and visions that we can't even foresee yet in the future. But at the same time, we think it can also retain this really unique quality that it has, what we've been referring to as the one and only Portlands. And if you start to look more closely at the site, we think that there's already a kind of authentic diversity that's there now. So what do we mean by two Torontos? Well, this is kind of an observation that we've made. There's the inner Toronto, as we're calling it, which I think is the Toronto that we're all most familiar with. It's the urban Toronto, the one of streets, the one of blocks, the one of parks, the one of commerce. But there's also another Toronto that maybe sometimes some of us forget about. It's this kind of wild green fringe that hugs the southern edge of the city. And it is occupied, it is developed in places, but it's developed in a different kind of way than the urban inner Toronto that we know. And we think that's actually a quality that's really important to the wilds in the outer Toronto. And these two kinds of Toronto come together at this seam, this blue seam, which is the ship channel. And it makes us wonder if in transforming the Portlands, that the qualities that are already there, these two different qualities, might actually inform, and they might be something that we can actually build upon when we're transforming the Portlands, and that this kind of significant blue ship channel element in the middle is somehow really central to the vision for how this neighborhood revitalizes. And then we thought we would even start to look more closely and try to better understand what are the unique and inherent diversities that already exist on the site, the one and only Portlands. And so in order to do this, we held, amongst other things, a really great workshop 2 summers ago. We brought a whole bunch of different participants together, a range of backgrounds, and we thought if we're really going to have a ground-up vision, it has to come from all of us. And so we started by really getting to know the site. We walked the site, we biked the site, but most importantly, we took a boat out, because in this water-centric area of the city, how can you possibly get to know it unless you're literally on the water? And we tasked participants with recording for us images, atmospheres, elements, objects, structures that represented to them the one and only Portlands, the qualities that made this place special. And we took this inventory of images and we started to call them the exceptions and the exceptional. We got a remarkable range of photographs, things that spoke to industry, both past and present, the kind of absolutely awe-inspiring scale of the industrial architecture, and also this kind of overgrown, strangely beautiful, wild and natural condition that layers with kind of past infrastructures. And also, I think the idea that there's an active industry, there's work that's actively being done there on a daily basis, also layered into what makes this place unique and what creates these kind of positive frictions there. So we mapped all these things out, and we think they're foundational to how the area is going to develop. So we kind of called it the DNA of the plan, upon which all of the layers would build. As well as looking kind of closely and exploring the site, we also were interested in, recognizing that there are some massive transformation projects already going on in the area. Of course, the unparalleled in scale and scope restoration of the mouth of the Don, which is hugely important to the area, and it made us wonder if the Portlands, kind of as a counterpoint, could start to take a cue from the bold industrial roots that are still there and the proximity to a currently working port, as opposed to a restoration to the landscape that used to be there. And we also looked at this in a kind of structural way. So might there be some sort of clues in there for us where this kind of fluid and fluvial nature of the transformation in the lower Dawnlands could then be kind of paralleled with a reading of the qualities that are more constructed, industrial, rectilinear that exist in the infrastructure there now. And it got us to ask this question that, if the lower Dawnlands are reviving something that past industry has actually obscured, maybe the rest, the Portlands, we can actually celebrate industry, both what it's built in the past, what it's building now, and also what's yet to come. And I think this idea of sort of building on the past to inform the present and then to look further into the future, that's really the organic way that cities develop. It makes cities resilient. And maybe sometimes we forget that a little bit. I mean, I think we've become so good at delivering new developments that have all of the amenity and have everything that we desire right at our fingertips. They just kind of spring up and they're complete and they're great neighborhoods. But it does kind of make you wonder if they're able to start to accommodate unforeseen things in the future and changes that might come to land uses. So we've looked towards other places in the world that we think have done that really well and that enrich in the environments of these places. In particular, places that are similar to the Portlands in that they started as either port or industrial areas, but then have gone through numerous reincarnations and new lives, such as Dumbo in New York City, which probably a lot of people know, which was once an area tied to shipping and factories. Then later, because of cheap rents, artists started to move in, and now it's actually a thriving live-work community. And through all of these different reincarnations, the legacy of the past is always kind of brought forward and built upon. And we think that's actually really fundamental to the vision for the Portlands itself. And so we've tried to encapsulate that here in this little text. So a city is a process. The plan for the Portlands will not be a finished article, not the end game. Rather, it will continue to evolve, as it always has, to accommodate the things we can imagine and perhaps some we can't yet. The legacy of our process will be the structure we set in place to accommodate this evolution, a series of signature streets and open spaces, both blue and green, a fine grain of rational, robust blocks. First, they may house creative industry and commerce, later pioneer residences and communities. Our opportunity is to avoid the temptation to rush to a concise conclusion, preserving potential and recognizing that there is already a there. The time it will take to evolve is its strength, not its weakness. This will be an entirely new kind of revitalization, one which not only celebrates built and natural heritage, but one which actively creates it. Okay, so now this brings us to the way that we try and ground this vision and put in place structures that can help to actively create an evolving and flexible place in the Portlands. And we do that because the Portlands, like the city, will never really be done. So the first action is this idea of stitching to the city. So 6 signature streets that stitch the Portlands back to the city. These are north-south connections. We think there's around 6 of them. Some of them are existing and some of them are new. And this is something that really came out of the vision workshop, as well as our own observations, that these north-south connections are not just about increasing porosity and bringing people to and through the site, but they're really about drawing much deeper back into the city and creating these kind of sequences or journeys where the character of places beyond the Portlands actually starts to inform the character and quality of the streets in the Portlands. So every street then becomes a kind of linear open space that is about sequencing journeys as opposed to just getting you from A to B. So if you take Cherry Street, for example, and we go kind of north of the Portlands, you go through a whole bunch of interesting and distinct and different neighborhoods, the Distillery, the Canary District, you come across the Keating Channel, you're in the New Villiers precinct, and then you're passing through a new estuary, and then all of a sudden you pass over this, the beautiful Bascule Heritage Bridge, and maybe even get a taste of the Cherry Beach kind of drawn up into the street as a gateway. In a totally different character, the Don Roadway might take on a very kind of green and sort of water-related quality where it's kind of adjacent to this new blue-green edge and ultimately brings you down into the wilds. Similarly, Broadview would have its own kind of journey all the way through to Leslie, which would be a green portal that would draw you all the way back from north into the city down to one of the most amazing green resources we have, which is the Spit. And all of these signature streets would be different, and they'd all embody a different character, but that character would very much be informed and sort of defined starting from existing positions in the city outside of the site that would then sort of draw in. Broadview they're all really significant streets, but there's something kind of particularly exciting about the extension of Broadview, the opportunity to really have a street, a civic spine that could take you all the way from the ravines down to the harbor. It's interesting from Riverdale Park, which is at one of Adam's favorite views of the city, of the skyline, you get this amazing view to the CN Tower. And we wonder if you could, in the extension of the street, actually start to connect to another landmark tower, the amazing resource, which is the Hearn, which we think has so much opportunity and potential to redevelop as a new cultural hub destination, both for the area, but city and even, further abroad as a destination. And so this is what it might look like, connecting all the way from the ravines and the high order transit up at the subway station, all the way down through a whole bunch of neighborhoods, through the Portlands, connecting different hubs down to Lake Ontario itself. And the street itself has been aligned in a way that you might actually get this really nice axial view for part of it that kind of announces the amazing presence of the quality of the Portlands and the Hearn as you go down the path, and on the ground it might look something like this. So the next point is uniting the harbor and the wilds, and here we're dealing more with east-west connections. So 3 east-west linear systems that showcase the unique qualities of the Portlands. And notice that we say systems and not streets, because 2 of them are streets. There's the kind of north of the Ship Channel Important Spine Commissioners, totally different quality, Unwin in the south, which is the border of the most wild and unkempt and beautiful nature in the area. And then the third, which is the Water Street, the Ship Channel, which we think is equally as important as an east-west system, even though it's not an actual vehicular road itself. And these 3 systems kind of come together and they meet at the seam at the Ship Channel. And they're also anchored by what we think are 2 really significant opportunities for public open space. One is the revitalization of the Hearn and a really significant public plaza around it. And the other is a sort of less conventional way of looking at open space at the current turning basin, a kind of blue square, and what it could mean to actually think about water as a water square as an equally viable and exciting opportunity for being part of the open space. And so they all come together and form this kind of robust east-west armature. And they might look something like this, each taking cues from the characters that are already existing and developing elements within the streets that draw from the character that's there. And something that's kind of interesting when we're talking about the Ship Channel, this came out of the workshop, is it's almost 3 kilometers long. And when you look at streets in the city, you never have a 3 kilometer long street that's just the same for the entire length. So why should the Ship Channel's edge be? So for that reason, we're looking to bring a sort of diversity of character and function across the length of the channel. So there may be loop streets in places that could activate the channel, particularly in winter seasons. Also very generous and extended places that are only for pedestrians and cyclists. And there might even be the possibility to explore extending the public realm out onto the water surface with new forms of floating culture that actually kind of double the amount of activity that you could have down there. So when you bring all the north-south and east-west systems together, you get the system of the major streets. And it's really important to kind of talk about these streets not just as kind of conveyance systems for cars, but really as places themselves, as linear open spaces that are not secondary to the open space network, but are actually places where public life and the public realm can unfold. And I think we have a lot of opportunity here to actually start to create really unique places. So for example, on Cherry Street, like I mentioned before, there's an opportunity to even like draw the beach up and create a kind of gateway promenade that might even have, you know, signature cherry trees and even a kind of sandy playground. And sort of similarly complete in that it accommodates all the different kind of balance of modes that you would want in a street, but completely different in its character. The Don Roadway, a kind of continuous boardwalk along this beautiful new green estuary edge. Of course, all of these major streets would accommodate cycling, which is a huge priority and really, really important as a very viable mode in the transportation network, and they would do it in different ways: cycle tracks, multi-use trails. Similarly, transit, a robust transit network would be accommodated throughout the area, and in places where we may not have the ability to put the entire network in place, we would absolutely protect in the future so that we wouldn't preclude the ability for the transit system to build itself out more. All right, so the major network is just kind of one piece of the framework, but I think in order to really achieve this kind of flexibility and evolution, ability for the place to evolve over time, you really have to have a robust network of local streets, and that's what really can generate the diverse urban fabric. And so we have, you know, we believe there should be, you know, even more than twice as many major streets in terms of this kind of finer grained local flexible network. And this could take the forms of, you know, kind of cozy shared laneways, or very kind of tight but still very functional local scaled streets, some that might prioritize the industrial activities, others that would prioritize spill out and pedestrian and cycling activities, which all come together in a resilient local street network that can allow for the evolution of diverse and memorable districts within the Portlands. So when we were looking at the block structure, one of the most important things was this idea of flexibility, the idea that the blocks would be able to break down in scale, and they would be able to accommodate different scales and different uses of building over time. And I think what's important to mention is that the legacy that we can leave here is a street grain that is able to accommodate all those differences, so that the kind of local network is already in place now, so that even if a bunch of blocks would come together in a kind of current industrial state, that there's opportunity in the future to break it down further. And so we've tested, you know, all sorts of different types of uses of buildings, some that are very familiar to people. It also says a lot about the scale of this place. So if you look at the middle one of those pink blocks that you see up in the middle can actually house the St. Lawrence Market. So that's a sense of how big the blocks are. And you could absolutely imagine then that a block as big as the St. Lawrence Market in time could start to further break down and accommodate a whole bunch of other buildings over time. And we did a similar exercise looking at the block structure in all of the different neighborhoods, always with this idea of being able to have a grain that can break down, but also exploring different forms. So courtyard forms, as well as kind of finer grain in certain areas, anticipating some of the current and industrial uses, but also imagining that these forms could transition to mixed-use communities, to residential as time goes on. So when you take all of that sort of network of streets and linear open spaces within the streets, and then layer on top of them a green open space system, first we can talk about it in the way that we might sort of traditionally talk about an open space network. So a series of all sorts of different kinds of green and green spaces and recreational spaces and squares. And I think built into this open space network is a whole bunch of is a diversity of different uses. But what we've tried to do is actually take it one step further and ask this question, well, does the open space network just have to be about green, or what about this blue character that's so important and meaningful to the way that the kind of current quality of the area? So if we start by looking at the city of Toronto, we always think of it as a city by the lake. It's adjacent to the water. Well, if you look at that same kind of circle on top of the Portlands, it's kind of remarkable that the Portlands isn't the city by the lake, it's the city in the lake. And this is really, really meaningful. So what it kind of starts to say is that, you could almost break it down that maybe about a third of the area would actually be developed buildings, servicing parking lots, that kind of stuff that we know, the urban stuff. Then maybe a third would be the more kind of traditional open space network with a system of green that's connected. But then still you have a third that is the water that we're just inheriting in this kind of amazing form in the Portlands. And we wonder if this sort of makes us need to kind of flip perceptually and start to take what we used to imagine maybe as the negative space, which is the water, and actually make it a positive active space within the plan. So this is kind of the traditional way that cities are often analyzed, where all of the built form will be kind of highlighted and everything else is just kind of whited out in the background. So if you flip that and you want to get a picture of the extensiveness of the open space system, if we first start with the more traditional way, just looking at green, the network of streets and parks and open spaces would look something like that. And I guess our provocation is, what if we actually take that one step further and add in the blue, and then all of a sudden the public realm, which is the place where we spend so much of our time when we're out of the house, is actually really extensive and really immense and exciting. And this isn't something that's new. I mean, of course, we have to look at other cities that have done, that operate in similar ways, where water is not just something to look at or something that's on the side, but it's actually something that's really meaningful in the daily experience of people in the cities. So again, we could imagine that water isn't just, the lake isn't just something you see, it's something that you interact with, you float on, you jump in. It also is something that works. It's water, the presence of water is also something that, helps to clean and to support industry. And all of these myriad uses of water are sort of somehow integral in informing in the public realm. As we mentioned before, the idea that a water square could actually be a really significant public space is something that came out of the workshop, something that's really exciting and that you see in other places in the world, and something that might be able to take on any number of different characters, but we think is a really, really interesting opportunity in the plan. And okay, so there's the water that we've inherited that's around the site, but then there's also the question of stormwater and how we deal with the water that falls on the site and that's so commonly and conventionally is just kind of channeled underground into pipes. Is there not also an opportunity to have that water become a meaningful part of this plan? We heard things in the workshop like, shoes off in water in a street. How great would that be? Let's get our feet wet. And I think this idea of getting our feet wet has really started to inform some of the principles and the way that we're looking at water, and also how that's being developed in the design of the streets themselves. So identity, clearly the water is a huge part of the identity here, but we think it can actually even be more active and structural. So the streets and the open spaces can actually start to integrate the conveyance and the cleaning of stormwater in features that aren't just for technical reasons, but also have an opportunity to be places that people can gather, places to enhance the quality and spirit of the public realm. Of course, that also provides areas for shade and microclimate, and similarly an idea that we can kind of bring to life the narrative of water that is so often just kind of channelized underground. What if we daylight that? What if people actually become we make people more aware of the fact that, by paving all of our streets and paving all of our properties, we're actually doing an enormous disservice to this communal resource, which is Lake Ontario and all the natural resources that are based on that. So we've really taken this quite seriously and started to explore how the streets can have open features, open swales, open channels that actually celebrate the presence of stormwater. So they work in a technical way, but they also provide really interesting and unique environments that are kind of geared to the individual quality of the streets. So if you then put those structural layers all together, the stitching of this back to the city north-south, the important connections that we can make east-west from the wilds all the way through to the harbor, the idea of filling that out with a diverse, fine-grained urban fabric that is flexible, that can accommodate evolution and change over time, and finally, this very robust open space network that's not just green, but that's also blue. If we put all those layers together and then we kind of confront them and superimpose them on what we call the DNA, the foundation of the plan, which is the exceptions and the exceptional things, which are both artifacts, but they're also active qualities and diversity that exist on the site. If you put that all together, well, you get what we're calling the framework plan, this flexible structure plan, which can connect some of Toronto's most significant existing and future open spaces, both blue and green.